What if I told you that the very first clue to Meghan Markle's sudden departure wasn't whispered by an insider, wasn't planted in a tabloid, but was written by Meghan herself, in her own hand, in ink, locked away inside her private mansion? Imagine it. A figure who has carefully built her narrative around victimhood, freedom, and reinvention, undone not by paparazzi, not by royal aides, but by her own pen. Think about it. What could possibly be in those journals, those secret diaries, that would send her running across borders, vanishing under a veil of secrecy? That's where our story begins. With an image so striking, so chilling, that it immediately sparks a question in your mind. What if Meghan's most guarded truths were never meant to be revealed, but now lie in someone else's hands? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because here's the truth. Every public figure has a private voice. Every polished interview hides an unfiltered thought. And Meghan, perhaps more than anyone else, has lived a life caught between what she says to the world and what she confides in private. These journals? They may be the bridge between the Meghan the world thinks they know and the Meghan only Harry, only the palace, only those closest to her truly understood. Let me ask you, why do people keep diaries? Is it to remember? To vent? To make sense of a world that doesn't seem to make sense? Or is it, sometimes, to protect themselves? For Meghan, who has built her brand on controlling the narrative, on shaping perception, keeping a written record feels dangerous. It's like leaving fingerprints at a crime scene. And yet she did. Inside that mansion, far away from palace gates, she wrote. Late at night, after arguments. On mornings filled with fear. In moments of triumph, and moments of bitterness. She put into words what she could never say in public. And now, those words have surfaced. Why does this matter now? Because the timing is everything. Meghan has been struggling with public opinion. Hollywood is questioning her star power. Royal insiders are tightening their grip. And just when she needs to appear untouchable, flawless, invincible, her own secrets break through the surface. Can you imagine how devastating that must feel? Let's pull back for a moment. Picture Meghan, seated at a sleek wooden desk in Montecito. The Californian sun glows through tall windows. The house is quiet. Harry's gone for the day. The kids are with their nanny. And Meghan reaches for a pen. That first word she writes, it's harmless. But then another word. And another. Soon, her frustrations pour onto the page. Her resentments. Her disappointments. Her anger at Kate. Her cynicism about Charles. Her doubts about Harry. It's all there. And each line is a brick in the wall of her hidden truth. Why would she take that risk? Was it catharsis? A way of proving to herself that she had endured? Or was it leverage? Ammunition for a future battle with the royals? After all, Meghan has never shied away from playing the long game. But here's the twist. Those pages weren't destroyed. They weren't locked in a safe. They were found. By whom? That's the mystery. A worker? A confidant? Someone she trusted? We don't yet know. What we do know is that once those words were seen, they couldn't be unseen. Think of the contradiction here. Meghan, who often claims she was silenced, who says she was voiceless inside the palace, secretly gave herself the loudest voice possible, one that didn't need cameras or interviews. Her own words, stripped bare of PR polish. And now, those words are louder than any Netflix documentary, any Oprah sit-down. And that's where the danger lies. Because these journals don't just contain personal reflections. They contain names, dates, incidents, secrets that were never supposed to see daylight. Secrets about Harry's weaknesses, Kate's pressures, Charles's struggles to command respect as king. Secrets about palace life that could shatter the monarchy's carefully built image. You see the danger now, don't you? This isn't about Meghan embarrassing herself. This is about Meghan potentially blowing open a dynasty. And if that happened, who would be blamed? Meghan herself. That's why this story matters now. Because it's not just gossip. It's not just scandal. It's power, control, reputation. And Meghan knows that if her words fall into the wrong hands, her entire empire, her brand, her Hollywood aspirations, even her marriage, could collapse. But ask yourself this, why leave now? Why run, when she has always projected strength? Because sometimes, survival isn't about fighting. It's about escaping before the walls close in. Picture the scene, Meghan, spotted at an airport. Sunglasses, hood pulled tight. No wide smile for the cameras. No staged hand-holding with Harry. Just urgency. Just fear. Just the knowledge that once those pages were exposed, she had no choice but to vanish. And what about Harry? Where was he in all this? Did he know? Did he try to stop her? Or was he as blindsided as the rest of us? That, too, is a question those journals may answer. Because if Meghan was writing about him, his doubts, his mistakes, how could he stand beside her when the world read the truth? Now, here's where it gets even darker. Imagine being Meghan. For years, you've accused the palace of trapping you, of silencing you. And yet, now, it's your own words, your own voice, that trap you, that betray you, that silence you far louder than any palisade ever could. The irony is staggering, isn't it? And still, the biggest question remains. What, exactly, was written in those pages? Because while whispers of Harry, Kate, Charles, and palace life have surfaced, the real content remains hidden from public view. Hidden for now. But here's what we know. Whatever it was enough to shake Meghan to her core. Enough to make her leave everything behind. Enough to force her hand. So let me leave you with this. If the discovery of these journals could drive Meghan Markle out of the country, what else is written inside them? What revelation was so damaging, so unthinkable, that even Meghan herself couldn't risk staying? Because as explosive as this story already is, what comes next could change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started with a locked door. Not the kind of lock you'd expect in a sprawling Montecito mansion. A subtle keyhole hidden in plain sight. Something even staff had learned never to touch. For weeks, maybe months, it was just another detail in a house filled with polished surfaces and quiet hallways. But then, one day, someone opened it. And behind that door was something Meghan Markle never wanted the world to see. Ask yourself this. Why does someone build a sanctuary, then hide pieces of themselves inside it? Why create a picture-perfect life, only to stash away the truth? That's exactly what was uncovered. A truth written in Meghan's own hand, buried not in a vault in London, not in the palace archives, but in her California mansion. The discovery began quietly. A trusted worker, perhaps a housekeeper, maybe a contractor, someone who wasn't supposed to stumble into that private space, found a stack of leather-bound notebooks. They were heavy, worn, not the kind of glossy journals you buy to impress others, but the kind that carry weight. Ink stains on the edges, faded corners, evidence of time and emotion. And when the first page was opened, that's when everything changed. Think of the shock. Reading not Meghan's carefully rehearsed interviews, not her carefully edited podcasts or Netflix scripts, but Meghan unfiltered. Meghan raw. Meghan furious. These weren't notes meant for public consumption. They weren't speeches or letters. They were confessions. The words cut like glass. She wrote of Harry, not as the adoring husband she parades in public, but as the man she doubted, questioned, resented. She wrote of Kate, not as a sister-in-law, but as a rival, a shadow, an enemy who always seemed to shine brighter. And she wrote of Charles, not as the monarch, but as a man struggling to command respect, a man she believed the world saw differently than the image he worked so hard to project. But the most chilling part? Meghan described palace life in vivid, brutal detail. The walls, the conversations, the rules. How they monitored her. How they whispered. How she plotted her own escape while still inside. Every page dripped with bitterness, with a sense of betrayal, and with secrets that no outsider should ever have had access to. Let me ask you, if you had a chance to peek into someone's most private thoughts, would you? Even if you knew it could destroy them? Because that's what happened here. Someone read, someone saw, and someone decided these words couldn't stay buried. The journals weren't fiction. They weren't rehearsed. They were real. Handwriting experts, if brought in, could authenticate every loop of her M, every sharp slash of her K. This was Meghan's voice, stripped of spin. And here's the contradiction that makes it all so explosive. Meghan has spent years telling the world she was silenced, that she had no voice, that the palace shut her down. And yet, here we find, in these journals, the loudest, most unrestrained voice she ever had. She was never voiceless. She was writing all along. And those writings could ruin her. So picture it. The discovery spreads quietly at first. Whispers among staff. Then to a few insiders. Then, inevitably, to hands far more dangerous. Someone realized the value of what they held. These weren't just journals. They were weapons. And Meghan? She realized it too. Because once those notebooks were opened, there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. Now, imagine the panic. Meghan pacing her Montecito halls, Harry asking what's wrong, Meghan insisting everything is fine, while she's already making calls, already preparing her exit. The walls were closing in, not because of paparazzi lenses, but because of her own pen strokes. Have you ever seen someone caught by their own truth? That's Meghan, in this moment. But what exactly did the first page say? What was so devastating, so dangerous, that it sent her spiraling into fear and secrecy? That's the part that takes this story to a new level. Because while the opening entries were shocking enough, the first fully detailed note about Prince Harry was far darker than anyone expected. And that revelation, those words Meghan wrote about her own husband, would mark the beginning of the end. Because what came next would not just shake Meghan. It would tear apart everything she thought she controlled. And no one saw it coming. What's the one thing you can never fake? Your own handwriting. You can polish your image. You can rehearse your words. You can edit your interviews until they shine. But once your hand hits paper, every curve, every loop, every jagged slash of ink, it's you. There's no undo button. No PR team to sweep in. No Netflix producer to retake the shot. It's raw, permanent. And that's exactly why the discovery of Meghan Markle's handwritten journals hit like a thunderclap. These weren't typed notes on a laptop. They weren't dictated into a phone. They were ink on paper. And that means something powerful. They carry the weight of authenticity. There's no denying the ownership of a crooked E or the sharp tilt of an R. Anyone who saw these pages knew instantly they belonged to Meghan. Now imagine being the person who turned the first page. The jolt of recognition. The quick intake of breath when they realized, this isn't just Meghan's writing. This is Meghan's voice. Stripped down, unmasked, honest in a way the world has never heard her. And what was written? Not the carefully curated My Truth soundbites she's fed to Oprah, not the sympathetic anecdotes designed to win Hollywood applause. No, these were unfiltered thoughts. Bitter, raw, sometimes cruel, sometimes shockingly vulnerable, and often damning. She wrote about Harry, how he was fragile in ways she'd never admit publicly, how his insecurities weighed on her, how she sometimes resented the burden of carrying him through media storms. That's not the Meghan we've seen smiling beside him on red carpets. That's a Meghan admitting, in her private scrawl, that life with Harry wasn't the fairy tale she sold to the cameras. She wrote about Kate, her rival in poise, in popularity, in public perception. In the journals, Meghan's words toward Kate weren't sisterly. They weren't even neutral. They dripped with frustration, even envy. She described moments when Kate outshined her, when Kate seemed untouchable, when the palace would rally around Kate while Meghan felt pushed aside. Imagine the sting in those words. Imagine the difference between the public solidarity we saw and the private resentment on those pages. And Charles. Meghan wrote about Charles as though she were chronicling the flaws of a man who had ascended to power but never won her respect. She questioned his authority. She doubted his sincerity. She hinted at hypocrisy. These weren't the cautious words of a daughter-in-law trying to keep peace. They were the blunt assessments of someone who saw herself as an outsider and didn't care if she burned bridges in ink. Let me ask you, do you see the danger here? Diaries aren't just records. They're weapons. And Meghan's handwriting gave those words more weight than any headline or rumor ever could. The royals could deny a story leaked in the press. They could spin an anonymous source. But Meghan's own handwriting? That's undeniable. Here's the irony. The very woman who accused the palace of silencing her was never silent. She had always been speaking, just in secret, on paper. Her words weren't broadcast, but they existed. And now they've been found. Think about the contradictions. Meghan built her brand on authenticity. I'm telling my truth, she insisted. Yet, behind closed doors, her private truth contradicted the one she sold to millions. What happens when those contradictions are laid bare? When the polished Meghan collides with the handwritten Meghan, that's where the chaos begins. Experts could verify the ink, the paper, the age of the journals. But honestly, they didn't need to. Because anyone familiar with Meghan's style could hear her in every line. The rhythm of her words. The dramatization of small slights. The grandiosity of her self-image. It was all there, unmistakable. And let's not forget, handwriting carries emotion. The entries about Harry were shaky, uneven, almost frantic. The ones about Kate? Tighter, angrier, the pen pressing harder against the paper. The ones about Charles? Cool, detached, laced with irony. These weren't just words. They were moods captured in ink. But here's the kicker. Amid the anger, there were glimpses of vulnerability. Meghan writing about feeling watched, about not belonging, about fearing betrayal from people closest to her. These weren't just attacks. They were confessions. Pain mixed with venom. Humanity mixed with calculation. So we ask again, why write any of this down? Why risk it? Was it self-preservation? Was she building a record in case she ever needed proof? Or was it simply the compulsion of someone who couldn't keep her thoughts bottled up any longer? Whatever the reason, the danger is the same. Once written, the words are permanent. And once discovered, they're lethal. And here's where things turn chilling. Because it wasn't just the handwriting that confirmed these were Meghan's journals. It was the first fully legible entry. And that entry was about Harry. Not about Charles. Not about Kate. Not about the Queen. About Harry, the man she claimed was her soulmate, her partner, her protector. What she wrote about him shattered the illusion she spent years building. And it's in that first shocking entry that we see the beginning of the unraveling. Because if Meghan could be this honest, this cutting, this contradictory about Harry in her private journals, what else could be hidden deeper inside those pages? The answer? More than anyone was prepared to face. Because the first full revelation about Harry was about to spill into the open. And what it revealed would not only damage him, it would damage her. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Harry, the man Meghan once called her safe harbor. The man she told the world saved her from despair. The man she walked away from the palace with, hand in hand, into the California sun. But in her private journals, that same Harry looked very different. The first full entry about him was shocking, not because it painted him as cruel or villainous, but because it exposed him as weak, insecure, and, most damningly, expendable in Meghan's grand design. Let me ask you this. How does a woman who's built her brand on loyalty, on love, on a fairy tale romance, secretly describe her husband in words so cold they could freeze blood? The entry began innocuously enough. Meghan described a fight they'd had after one of their public appearances. She wrote about Harry fumbling through a speech, about how embarrassed she felt watching him stammer in front of cameras. She admitted she smiled and clapped in the moment, but in the privacy of her mind. In her journal, she was livid. "He needs me," she scrawled. "Without me, he's nothing. And sometimes I wonder, how much longer can I carry him?" Read that again. "Without me, he's nothing." Imagine Harry ever seeing those words. Imagine the man who gave up his royal life, his military ties, his family legacy, only to discover his wife wrote him down as an anchor she was forced to drag. The entry grew darker. Meghan compared Harry to his brother, to William, and not in Harry's favor. She wrote that William had the presence Harry lacked, the confidence Harry would never possess. "Harry," she wrote, "is too fragile for this world. But he thinks he's stronger than he is. You feel that? That sting? That humiliation?" The Meghan of the cameras, the Meghan who defended Harry against every critic, was privately mocking him in ink. And then came the contradictions. Meghan described Harry as both her greatest asset and her greatest liability. In one line, she wrote about how his wounds from childhood made him malleable, easy to guide, easy to shape. In another, she expressed frustration that those same wounds made him unpredictable, prone to outbursts, difficult to control. She confessed a chilling thought. "Sometimes I think I've married his trauma, not the man." Now pause. Think about the weight of that line. To the world, Harry and Meghan presented themselves as the embodiment of healing, growth, escape from toxicity. But in the quiet of her journal, Meghan reduced her marriage to a battle with Harry's demons. A burden she admitted she wasn't sure she wanted to carry. Here's where the story digs deeper. Meghan hinted at moments when Harry's loyalty wavered. Times when he questioned the path they'd chosen. Times when he wondered if leaving the palace had been a mistake. She wrote of arguments where Harry talked about missing his old life, his military friends, his sense of duty, even the palace structure he once despised. And Meghan's reaction? Fury. She wrote of feeling betrayed, of Harry's weakness enraging her. "He wanted freedom," she scribbled, "and then he mourned the chains. Does he not see the contradiction? Does he not see me?" Direct question to you. Can you imagine the fallout if Harry realized his wife had documented his doubts? That she'd memorialized his moments of weakness in ink, in a diary that could one day be weaponized? But the entries weren't all anger. They were laced with cold calculation. Meghan described how Harry's vulnerabilities made him pliable, how she could redirect him by feeding his resentment toward William or Charles. If I remind him of how they treated him, she wrote, he falls back into step. It's always worked. Stop for a second. Doesn't that sound more like strategy than love? The contradictions grew sharper. Meghan oscillated between frustration and pity, control and contempt. In one breath, she mocked Harry for his naivete. In the next, she praised his devotion. In another, she confessed that without Harry's royal bloodline, she would have been just another actress chasing relevance. He gave me the stage, she admitted, but sometimes I think he doesn't deserve to stand on it with me. This is the Meghan the world was never supposed to see. Not the supportive wife, but the strategist. Not the woman in love, but the woman calculating her next move. And yet, in those very same journals, she exposed the fragility of the entire Sussex brand. Because if Meghan didn't fully believe in Harry, if she mocked him, doubted him, even resented him, what did that say about the image they sold to the world? Imagine Harry discovering these words. The man who gave her everything, reduced in ink to a pawn, a liability, a husband she sometimes wished she could rewrite. And here's the real danger. If this is how Meghan wrote about Harry, the man she was supposed to love most, what would her words about Kate look like? About a woman she never pretended to adore? About the rival who stood in her way? Because as brutal as Meghan's entries about Harry were, they were just the warm-up. The next journal pages didn't just sting, they detonated like bombs. And the name scrawled across those pages? Kate Middleton. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Jealousy, resentment, competition. If Meghan's words about Harry were shocking, her words about Kate were venomous. And it started with one single line, scribbled across a page in Meghan's unmistakable hand. Kate will always win. For words. For devastating words. Imagine the weight of that admission. Because for Meghan, who has spent years crafting her own narrative of triumph, survival, and reinvention, acknowledging that Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, would always come out on top was like swallowing poison. The entry unfolded like a confession wrapped in spite. Meghan described Kate not as a sister-in-law, not even as a rival, but as an immovable obstacle. The world sees her as perfect, Meghan wrote. Graceful, dutiful, serene. They forgive her everything. They forgive her silences. They forgive her mistakes. I can't compete with that. And I hate it. Think about that for a moment. Meghan, the woman who branded herself as bold, outspoken, unapologetic, admitting in private that she could not compete with Kate's quiet power. But the bitterness didn't stop there. Meghan wrote of her frustration at how the palace and the press seemed to orbit around Kate. Every dress she wore became a headline. Every smile, a symbol of stability. Meghan compared her own coverage to Kate's, seething at the contrast. I am picked apart for breathing, she scribbled. She is worshipped for standing still. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar to what we've all seen play out? The headlines, the side-by-side photos, the comparisons that Meghan claimed destroyed her self-esteem? In her journals, those wounds bled in ink. She described moments behind palace doors, tense dinners, cold stares, subtle digs. Meghan wrote that Kate rarely raised her voice but had an icy precision in her manner, a way of dismissing Meghan without ever uttering a cruel word. She kills softly, Meghan scrawled, and the palace adores her for it. But the most striking revelation? Meghan's fury at the public image of solidarity. Those staged photos where the two women walked side by side, smiling politely for the cameras? Meghan tore into those memories with rage. They forced us to act like allies, she wrote. But she despised me, and I despised her. Now ask yourself this. What happens when the world discovers that the so-called Fab Four was never a quartet of unity, but a battlefield disguised as a photo op? The contradictions ran deep. On one page, Meghan acknowledged Kate's elegance. On another, she mocked it, calling her a mannequin draped in royal cloth. In one passage, she admitted she envied Kate's restraint. In the next, she accused her of being robotic, soulless, trapped in a gilded cage. But the most chilling part? Meghan wrote of moments when she fantasized about outshining Kate once and for all. She described her wedding dress as her ultimate statement, her chance to eclipse Kate's iconic gown. She even admitted to strategizing appearances, choosing bold colors when Kate wore muted ones, scheduling interviews to undercut Kate's engagements. Every move, Meghan wrote, was designed to break her shadow. And yet, despite all that effort, the resentment only grew. Because no matter what Meghan did, no matter how bold, no matter how controversial, the public always seemed to circle back to Kate as the future queen. This wasn't just rivalry, it was obsession. An obsession captured in journal entries that shifted from bitterness to near paranoia. "She is untouchable," Meghan scrawled. "And that terrifies me." Now imagine those words leaking. Imagine the world discovering that Meghan didn't just feel overshadowed. She felt consumed by the idea that Kate was her unbeatable rival. That every smile Kate gave in public masked a private Cold War. But it didn't end with envy. Meghan also revealed a crueler side, mocking Kate's voice, her choices, even her relationship with William. She called their marriage dull, their public image scripted, and William himself a man chained to tradition. But then, in the same breath, she confessed she feared their strength as a couple. "They are unbreakable," she wrote, "and that makes them dangerous." Think about that. Meghan admitting that William and Kate's unity was a threat. Not because they were perfect, but because together they represented something Meghan and Harry could never fully embody: stability. But here's the cliffhanger. Buried within those pages about Kate was a shocking, almost throwaway line. A line that didn't just tear at Kate's image but hinted at something much bigger, something about King Charles. Because Meghan's venom wasn't limited to Kate. It reached all the way to the throne. And when you hear what she wrote about Charles, you'll understand why these journals weren't just embarrassing, they were dangerous. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. King Charles. For decades, he's been the man in waiting. The Prince of Wales who watched his mother reign longer than anyone thought possible. When he finally became king, it was supposed to be his moment of vindication, his long-awaited crown, his chance to prove himself as more than just the son who waited. But in Meghan's journals, Charles wasn't painted as a dignified monarch or a wise leader. He was something else entirely, something that, if exposed, could rattle the very foundation of the monarchy. The first line about him set the tone. Charles is a man desperate to be seen as relevant. Think about that. Meghan didn't describe him as powerful. She didn't describe him as regal. She described him as desperate. A man clinging to an image. A man afraid of irrelevance. In her handwriting, she laid out scenes that read less like royal history and more like satire. She wrote about dinners where Charles would drone on about climate change, trying to sound visionary, while those around the table rolled their eyes. "He speaks," Meghan scrawled, "as though he invented concern for the planet. But really, it's just another performance. Another way to look important." And then came the darker accusations. Meghan claimed that Charles had a manipulative streak, that he would pit family members against each other, subtly favoring one and then another, always keeping the balance in his control. "He thrives on division," she wrote. "The weaker we are, the stronger he feels." Doesn't that sound like the very opposite of the image the palace wants to project? The monarchy is supposed to be unity, tradition, stability. Yet Meghan described Charles as a puppeteer, pulling strings from behind velvet curtains. Her words cut deeper as she wrote of her private encounters with him. She described moments of warmth quickly overshadowed by condescension. "He smiles," she wrote, "but it never reaches his eyes. He wants to be seen as a father, but he behaves like a manager." Now pause and consider what happens if such words leak. Imagine the headlines. Meghan Markle accuses King Charles of manipulation, of insincerity, of being more concerned with image than family. It wouldn't just embarrass Charles, it would reinforce every criticism his detractors have whispered for years. And Meghan didn't stop there. She compared Charles to Diana, Harry's late mother. The contrast was brutal. "Diana was love," she scribbled. "Charles is control. He cannot inspire loyalty. He can only demand it." Those words, written in her own hand, are dynamite. Because Diana's memory is sacred to the British people. To set Charles against her in such a way is to reopen the wounds of the past. But here's where the entries take an even darker turn. Meghan wrote about how Charles viewed Harry and William differently. How he seemed to invest more in William, the air, while Harry was often sidelined. She described Harry's visible pain at these moments, and then, chillingly, admitted, "I use that. When I remind Harry of how Charles dismissed him, he clings tighter to me." Think about that for a moment. Meghan admitting, in her journals, to weaponizing Harry's wounds with his father, using a son's fractured relationship with his king as leverage in her marriage. What does that say about the trust between them? About the lengths she was willing to go to keep Harry under her influence? And then, the final blow, Meghan's blunt dismissal of Charles's reign. "He may wear the crown," she wrote, "but he will never have the world's heart." That was Diana's, and it will be William's. Charles is just the bridge no one asked for. Can you imagine those words reaching Charles himself? The humiliation? The rage? A daughter-in-law reducing his entire reign to a meaningless placeholder? But Meghan wasn't done. Because after she shredded Charles's reputation, she turned her pen towards something even more dangerous, the institution itself. The palace. The life behind those gates. The world that Charles represents. And in those entries, Meghan revealed what palace life was really like. The rules. The whispers. The betrayals. Because if Charles was the face of control, the palace was the machinery that kept it running. And Meghan's words about that world were more explosive than anything she'd written so far. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine the walls of Buckingham Palace. Towering, imposing, ancient. To the outside world, they symbolize stability, continuity, and tradition. But in Meghan's journals, those walls became something else entirely, a prison, a machine, a stage where the roles were scripted and the players controlled. Her words painted palace life not as a fairy tale, but as a suffocating theater. "The palace doesn't sleep," she wrote. "It watches." That single line sends a chill, doesn't it? Because Meghan wasn't talking about late-night meetings or busy schedules. She was talking about surveillance, about whispers in corridors, about the feeling that nothing, no word, no gesture, no glance, was ever truly private. She described being monitored in subtle, unnerving ways. Conversations that somehow made their way to aides she'd never spoken to. Minor complaints she voiced behind closed doors echoed back to her days later in official briefings. "Every wall has ears," she scrawled. "Every smile hides a report." And the contradictions were everywhere. In public, the palace projected grace, unity, and elegance. Behind closed doors, Meghan wrote of pettiness, rivalries, even sabotage. A staff member loyal to one royal would quietly undermine another. Stories would leak selectively, painting one family member as the villain, another as the saint. "It's not a family," she noted. "It's a company. And companies need scapegoats." Doesn't that align with what we've all wondered? The endless tabloid leaks, the anonymous sources, the stories that mysteriously surface at just the right time? Meghan's journals seemed to confirm what many suspected, that palace life was a chess game, and everyone was both a player and a pawn. She wrote of endless rules. Where to walk, what to wear, when to speak, even how to sit. The smallest breach became a scandal. They called it tradition, she wrote bitterly, but it felt like punishment. And then there was the isolation. Meghan admitted to writing pages about her loneliness inside those gilded walls. "A palace full of people," she scrawled, "and yet I was alone." She described walking hallways where portraits of queens glared down at her, where aides nodded but never confided, where every door felt locked, even when it was open. But the bitterness didn't stop at her own experience. Meghan exposed details of life for others too. She hinted at Charles's routines, at William's temper, at Kate's silent endurance. She described staff members caught between loyalties, forced to serve one royal at the expense of betraying another. "They say they serve the crown," she wrote, "but really, they serve survival." Now ask yourself this. What happens when these words get out? When the carefully polished image of palace life as serene, dignified, and unshakable is replaced with Meghan's portrait of paranoia, manipulation, and quiet warfare. The damage isn't just to Charles or William or Kate. It's to the entire institution. And here's the irony. Meghan herself admitted in one entry that she tried to play the game. She confessed to leaking small details to test the waters, to planting narratives that she thought would protect her. "I learned quickly," she scribbled, "that silence was never enough. You had to speak, but only in whispers." But those whispers came back to haunt her. Because the more she tried to play the palace at its own game, the more she realized the game was rigged. They wrote the rules centuries before I arrived, she wrote. And no outsider ever wins. The emotional spikes in her handwriting revealed her torment. In passages about isolation, her letters slanted downward, as though weighted by despair. In moments of rage, the ink pressed so hard it tore the paper. These weren't just notes, they were scars etched in ink. And then came a confession that shifted the entire narrative. Meghan admitted she wasn't just recording her pain, she was cataloging the palace's flaws. Systematically, intentionally, as though preparing for a day when she might need the evidence. One day, she wrote, the world will see what they did. And these pages will be my proof. That's not just venting. That's strategy. That's a weapon disguised as a diary. And here's the cliffhanger. Hidden at the bottom of one entry about palace life was a name. A name no one expected to find. A name Meghan linked to the idea of using these journals as leverage. It wasn't Harry. It wasn't Kate. It wasn't Charles. It was Meghan herself. Because in her own words, she admitted to crafting a strategy, using these journals not only as confession but as currency. And that revelation changes everything. What came next would expose Meghan's calculated plan, a plan so audacious it would leave even her staunchest defenders questioning everything they thought they knew. And no one saw it coming. Strategy. That's the word Meghan never spoke in interviews, but it bled through every page of her journals. Up until now, her entries sounded like venting, like a woman pouring her frustrations onto paper. But then the tone shifted. Suddenly the bitterness turned calculated, the complaints sharpened into tactics. These weren't just the thoughts of a lonely duchess. They were blueprints. One line said it all. These journals are my insurance. Stop and think about that. Insurance. Not therapy. Not memory. Insurance. That single word flips the entire narrative on its head. Meghan wasn't just writing for herself. She was writing for leverage. She detailed conversations with Harry where she hinted she might one day set the record straight. She wrote about palace figures, noting who insulted her, who slighted her, who underestimated her. She wasn't just recording her life, she was collecting ammunition. And here's where it gets darker. Meghan described deliberately shaping some entries as though she knew they'd be discovered one day. If they ever try to destroy me, she scribbled, these pages will destroy them first. Doesn't that sound less like a diary and more like a manifesto? She admitted to crafting her truth in multiple versions, one for public interviews, one for allies in Hollywood, and one in her private writings. Each version carried the same theme, Meghan as the survivor, but each told it differently, depending on who might read it. In the journals, she revealed the contradictions and quietly laughed at how the world swallowed her polished version whole. And then came the most chilling detail. Meghan used her entries to plan leaks. She described testing phrases, exaggerating certain slights, even rehearsing lines for future interviews. Oprah will eat this up, she wrote beside one anecdote. Netflix will want this one. Now imagine Harry ever reading those words, realizing that what he thought were genuine confessions to the world were premeditated, rehearsed performances, scripted first in a notebook. Direct question to you. How would you feel if your partner admitted in writing that your shared struggles, your private pain, were just bullet points in their PR playbook? The strategy stretched further. Meghan noted which allies could be trusted to carry her narrative. Oprah, Tyler Perry, Gayle King. She marked those she distrusted, even in Hollywood. And she warned herself to always keep receipts. That phrase, keep receipts, echoed through her entries like a mantra. And it wasn't just about words. Meghan admitted to storing photos, emails, messages, collateral to back up her claims. The journals became the index, the roadmap to all of it. If I go down, she wrote, I won't go down alone. But here's where it turns ironic. In her attempt to create insurance, Meghan may have created the very thing that destroys her. Because the moment those journals were discovered, her leverage became a liability. Instead of holding the cards, she exposed her hand. One particularly revealing passage described her thoughts on the Queen. Meghan wrote that Elizabeth II was untouchable in death, but that her memory could be reshaped in storytelling. History loves reinvention, she scrawled. Even the Queen can be rewritten. Think about the audacity of that. Meghan positioning herself not just as a participant in royal history, but as its editor. And then came the plan, her outline for the future. Meghan wrote about building her own dynasty in America, one that would eclipse the monarchy by harnessing media, fame, and sympathy. "The crown is a relic," she wrote, "but I am the future, if I play it right." But the cliffhanger is this. Buried deep in one entry, Meghan hinted at a conversation she claimed to have overheard. A conversation that tied her strategy directly to the Queen herself. She wrote, "The moment I realized how much power these pages gave me was the moment I heard her name spoken in a way no one dared." Whose name? Queen Elizabeth's. What did Meghan overhear? What was said that made her believe her journals could topple more than reputations, that they could threaten the monarchy itself? That answer was in the next section of her notes. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For decades, her very name carried weight like no other. To millions, Queen Elizabeth II wasn't just a monarch, she was the monarchy. Untouchable, eternal, a living embodiment of tradition and grace. But in Meghan's journals, the Queen's shadow loomed large, heavy, suffocating. One line stood out immediately, sharp in Meghan's curling handwriting. "She is everywhere, even in her absence." It was written after Elizabeth's passing, but the context ran deeper. Meghan described feeling haunted by the Queen, not as a ghost, but as a standard. The kind of standard Meghan admitted she could never live up to. "They will always compare me to her," Meghan scrawled. "And I will always lose." Pause there. That's an extraordinary admission. Meghan, who so often projects confidence, strength, and determination, confessing in ink that against Elizabeth, she could never measure up. But then, the resentment bled through. Meghan wrote of how Elizabeth's presence, even in her final years, overshadowed every attempt Meghan made to carve her own space. She mocked the endless references to the Queen's duty, her stoicism, her sacrifice. She smiled while caged, Meghan wrote bitterly. "And they call that noble. I refuse to smile, and they call me a disgrace." Doesn't that reveal something telling? Meghan saw herself as punished not for her actions, but for refusing to play the same role Elizabeth had perfected. Yet there was more. Meghan's words hinted at private conversations, moments she claimed to have witnessed that painted the Queen in an entirely different light. She described overhearing aides saying, "Her time is almost over, but the image must remain perfect." Meghan wrote that it struck her deeply, because even in her frailty, Elizabeth was treated as a symbol first, a human second. But Meghan didn't leave it at observation. She twisted it into strategy. "If the Queen could be curated until her last breath," she scribbled, "then history can be rewritten for anyone. Even her." That's where things get chilling. Meghan hinted at using Elizabeth's memory in her own narrative, casting herself as the misunderstood outsider versus the revered monarch. "She will be remembered as flawless," Meghan wrote, "and I as flawed. But flawed stories are louder. Flawed stories survive." The audacity of that thought. Meghan positioning herself as the foil to a woman who reigned for 70 years, would send shockwaves if revealed. And then came the confession that stopped even the most hardened reader in their tracks. Meghan described one moment when she stood near the Queen during a family gathering. Elizabeth, frail but sharp, looked at her directly. Meghan wrote, "Her eyes saw through me. She didn't need to speak. She knew." Knew what? Meghan never clarified. But the way she underlined the words, the way the ink pressed harder than usual, suggested fear. Not admiration. Not reverence. Fear. Imagine that. Meghan, who spoke so often about being silenced and controlled, admitting in her own handwriting that Elizabeth terrified her, not by power, but by presence. And yet, there was also envy. Meghan envied how Elizabeth could command a room without saying a word, how her very existence demanded loyalty, how she embodied a kind of power Meghan craved but could never achieve. "She was the monarchy," Meghan wrote, "and I am just a threat to it." The contradictions are almost poetic, resentment mixed with envy, fear tangled with admiration. Meghan both despised and desired the Queen's power. But then, hidden near the bottom of one entry, came the most dangerous revelation. Meghan wrote, "They whispered about her succession, about who would truly rule when she was gone. And in that whisper, I heard the truth. The throne is weaker than it looks." Now pause. That sentence alone could destabilize the monarchy's image. Meghan suggesting that the transition of power wasn't seamless, that cracks appeared the moment Elizabeth died, that behind the grandeur lay uncertainty. But she didn't stop there. She scribbled a warning to herself, as if reminding her future self of the stakes. If I ever release these words, it won't be me they fear. It will be what I heard about her. What did Meghan hear? What truth about Elizabeth's succession was so explosive she felt compelled to weaponize it in her journals? Because if the entries about Harry cut deep, if the ones about Kate dripped with venom, and if the words about Charles shattered dignity, then the revelations about Elizabeth hinted at something far darker. Something that could shake the monarchy not just in the present, but in its legacy. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Threat. That's the word Meghan scrawled in the margins of her journals again and again. Sometimes underlined once, sometimes twice, occasionally circled, as though she wanted to remind herself, over and over, that the danger wasn't only outside. It was inside. The threat isn't the press, she wrote in one entry. It's within these walls. Now pause. That flips the entire narrative, doesn't it? Because Meghan has always pointed outward, at tabloids, at paparazzi, at cruel headlines, as the enemy. But in her private pages, she admitted that the sharpest knives were hidden inside the palace itself. She described paranoia that dripped into every detail of her life. Doors she swore were left open. Conversations she thought were private, repeated back to her in chilling accuracy days later. Staff members who smiled warmly to her face, but delivered venom behind her back. They are watchers, she scribbled. And I was always the watched. Doesn't that sound more like a spy novel than royal life? And yet, that's exactly how Meghan painted it. She claimed she could never fully trust even Harry's circle. Old friends, aides, advisors, anyone who was tied to the crown, she believed, could turn on her. They report upwards, she wrote. Always upwards. And I never know where it stops. Her paranoia grew more intense after the Queen's death. Meghan admitted she felt eyes on her everywhere she went. She described standing at a palace window, looking down at the gates, and feeling that someone was watching her from the shadows. It's a cage, she wrote, but one that moves with me. I carry it even in California. Here's where the irony cuts deep. Meghan left the UK, claiming she wanted freedom. Yet her journals revealed she never truly felt free. The threat followed her, whether real or imagined. One passage hit like a dagger. I sleep with the fear that one day Harry will betray me too. Let that sink in. Meghan feared betrayal not just from the palace, not just from aides, but from Harry himself, the man who gave up everything for her. The contradiction is staggering. Publicly, she painted him as her protector. Privately, she questioned his loyalty. And here's where the danger escalated. Meghan suggested that the palace already had weapons against her, that they collected their own receipts. She wrote of whispered warnings, people hinting that they know more than you think. She even confessed her terror that private conversations, recordings, or letters could one day be leaked to destroy her. Every word I speak could be turned against me, she scribbled. That's why I write. At least these words are mine. Until they aren't. Doesn't that reveal the tragic paradox? Meghan thought her journals were safety, her own voice in a world that silenced her. But the moment they were found, they became her downfall. Her weapon became her enemy. And then came the entry that explained everything. The entry that hinted at why Meghan fled so suddenly, without warning, without her usual calculated performance. She wrote, "If they ever see the full pages, they'll know. They'll know what I said about the one who holds the crown." Which crown? Charles's? Elizabeth's? Or was Meghan hinting at something darker, something that reached beyond individuals and struck at the monarchy itself? One thing is clear. Meghan believed the palace would use her words as a weapon, that the very act of writing had created a ticking time bomb, and the fuse had already been lit. And just days after that entry, she was gone, spotted at an airport, hooded, rushed. No smiles, no theatrics, just flight. The timing is too precise to ignore. The journals were discovered. The threat grew, and Meghan ran. But here's the cliffhanger. The final entry in this chapter wasn't about the palace. It wasn't about Harry. It wasn't even about Kate or Charles. It was about the future. Meghan wrote, "The real danger isn't what they do with these pages. The real danger is what happens when the world reads them." And that line changes everything. Because if these journals ever make it into the public eye, the monarchy isn't just embarrassed. It's exposed. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began like a whisper and ended like a thunderclap. One moment, Meghan was in the UK, her presence largely unnoticed, her movements carefully shielded. The next, she was gone. Not with the fanfare she usually engineered. Not with the carefully staged paparazzi shots or the polished PR narrative. No, this time, Meghan Markle fled. The images were fleeting, caught almost by accident. A blurred photo of her at Heathrow, hood pulled low, sunglasses masking her face. A handbag clutched tight to her side. No Harry. No children. No entourage. Just Meghan. Hunched, hurried, exposed. Ask yourself why? Why would the woman who so often thrives on spectacle suddenly vanish without the performance? The answer, if her journals are to be believed, lies in fear. She never runs without reason, one insider whispered. And the reason this time was simple. The journals had surfaced. The pages had been read. And Meghan knew the clock was ticking. In one of her final entries, written days before her departure, she scrawled, "They're closing in. They've seen enough. I must leave before they decide how to use it." Imagine the panic. Meghan pacing her rented UK residence, the weight of her own words pressing down on her. Every creak in the hallway felt like surveillance. Every phone call felt tapped. Every whisper among staff felt like a betrayal. She knew she could control the press with lawyers. She knew she could manipulate Hollywood with charm. But this was different. Because these weren't rumors. These weren't stories twisted by tabloids. These were her words. Her handwriting. Her voice. And once that genie was out of the bottle, no PR team on earth could stuff it back in. So she ran. The logistics were rushed, messy, uncharacteristic of Meghan's usually tight grip on appearances. She was spotted in a plain black outfit, no designer labels in sight. Her luggage was minimal, as if she packed only what she couldn't leave behind. No smiles, no waves, just urgency. Airport staff later murmured that Meghan avoided VIP entrances. She moved quickly, almost frantically, through quieter corridors. She boarded her flight without fanfare, ducking her head as though the weight of her own notoriety had finally become unbearable. Now picture Harry in all this. Did he know? Was he left behind? Was he blindsided, as so many insiders suggest, by the suddenness of her departure? One source hinted that Harry wasn't with her because he wasn't meant to be. This was her escape, not theirs, they claimed. And here's the contradiction. Meghan always presented herself as a fighter. Someone who stood tall against the palace, against the press, against anyone who dared oppose her. But now, with her own words threatening to destroy her, she didn't fight. She fled. Why? Because fighting would have meant facing the truth. Facing Harry. Facing the royals. Facing the world. And Meghan knew she couldn't spin these journals into sympathy. Not this time. She boarded a flight bound for Los Angeles, the city where she once dreamed of stardom, now reduced to a sanctuary for hiding. Passengers reported she kept her head down, speaking to no one. She didn't order food. She didn't watch movies. She just sat, tense, scribbling in yet another notebook. Can you imagine what she was writing? Another entry? Another desperate attempt to control her narrative before it slipped entirely from her grasp? Because here's the irony. The very act of writing is what destroyed her. And yet, even on the run, Meghan couldn't stop. When her plane touched down, she was whisked away by a black SUV. No press waiting. No photo ops. Just silence. Meghan disappeared into Los Angeles as quickly as she had fled the UK. And that disappearance sparked chaos. The tabloids erupted. Headlines screamed, "Where is Meghan? Why did she leave? What was found?" The palace, characteristically, stayed silent. But silence can be deafening. And in this case, it only fueled the fire. Meanwhile, Meghan's journals, or at least portions of them, were already in circulation among those who had seen them. Whispers spread of Harry's humiliation, Kate's icy dismissal, Charles's manipulation, and the Queen's haunting shadow. Whispers that were growing louder, inching closer to the public eye. And Meghan knew it. That's why she ran. Not to escape the palace. Not to escape the press. But to escape her own words. But here's the cliffhanger. Because if Meghan thought fleeing the UK would save her, she underestimated one thing. Secrets this big, once uncovered, don't stay buried. And as whispers turned into leaks, Meghan realized the real battle hadn't even begun. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Fallout. That's the only word that captures what happened once whispers of Meghan's journals began to ripple across borders. It started in the UK, of course. The tabloids went into overdrive. Headlines splashed across front pages in the kind of type reserved for war and scandal. Meghan's secret diaries exposed. Explosive revelations hidden in Montecito Mansion. Harry betrayed in Meghan's own handwriting. The coverage wasn't just relentless. It was surgical. Each day brought a new leak, a new line allegedly from the pages, a new shock that kept readers hooked. Public reaction? Immediate, visceral, divided. On one side, outrage. How could she write this about Harry? About Kate? About the Queen? Royalists fumed, calling her selfish, disloyal, vindictive. Hashtags like hashtag Meghan exposed and hashtag royal traitor trended within hours. On the other side, defenders tried to frame the diaries as private therapy, never meant to be seen. But their voices were drowned out by the sheer scale of the revelations. Across the pond, the fallout looked different. In the US, Hollywood insiders started to whisper. Meghan had been courting producers, pitching projects, chasing deals. But now, every meeting became shadowed by the question, what else might be written down? No one in the industry likes unpredictability, and Meghan's journals suddenly made her radioactive. Can you imagine the humiliation? One day, she's selling herself as a brand, a star, a future mogul. The next, she's a liability, too risky to touch. And Harry? His world imploded. In the UK, commentators tore him apart. The prince who sold his crown for a woman who mocked him in ink. Friends whispered betrayal. Allies in the military and charities began to distance themselves. His credibility, already fragile, cracked further with every new diary excerpt. What about the palace? Their silence spoke volumes. No denials, no statements, just icy quiet. And in that vacuum, speculation grew. If Meghan's words weren't true, wouldn't the palace have shut it down immediately? Their refusal to comment made the world assume the worst, that her criticisms of Charles, Kate, and even the Queen had at least some foundation. Now, let's widen the lens. Globally, Meghan's flight from the UK turned into a media circus. News anchors in America, Europe, Australia debated her motives. Was she running because she was guilty? Or because she feared the monarchy's revenge? Opinion panels dissected her marriage. Late-night hosts joked about her keeping receipts. Even casual viewers, those who never cared about royal drama, suddenly leaned in. Because this wasn't just gossip. It was betrayal on a Shakespearean scale. And here's the kicker. The fallout didn't just hit Meghan and Harry. It hit the monarchy itself. Across Commonwealth countries, debates reignited about the crown's relevance. If Meghan's words are true, commentators argued, is this the institution we should still follow? Poll numbers shifted. Younger generations, already skeptical, grew more vocal. The monarchy, once protected by Elizabeth's dignity, was now vulnerable under Charles's shaky reign. Meanwhile, Meghan in Los Angeles remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no Instagram posts, just silence. And that silence became deafening. Every day she stayed quiet. The more people assumed the worst. Let me ask you, if you were Meghan, would you speak? Would you defend yourself, knowing that every word could backfire? Or would you stay silent, hoping the storm would pass? Because silence can sometimes be strategy. But in this case, silence only fueled the narrative that Meghan had been caught, cornered, exposed by her own hand. And then came the leaks. Not full journals, at least not yet, but small snippets. A paragraph about Harry's fragility. A bitter line about Kate's shadow. A dismissive note about Charles. Each leak hit like a grenade, tearing apart Meghan's carefully curated image. Here's the irony. Meghan once told Oprah, "I just wanted my voice." But now, her truest voice, her private one, was speaking louder than she ever wanted. And it wasn't saying what she wished. Global fallout turned Meghan from a symbol into a spectacle. And the more the world read, the more the question grew. What's still hidden in those pages? Because if the leaks were this explosive, what about the entries no one had seen yet? The ones kept under wraps, waiting for the right moment, the highest bidder, the most devastating release? And that's the cliffhanger. Because Meghan may have fled, but her words didn't. They stayed behind, scattered across pages, waiting to erupt. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Media. The one battlefield Meghan thought she could always control. From the moment she stepped into the royal spotlight, Meghan learned quickly that perception was everything. Every photo, every headline, every carefully chosen soundbite mattered. She wasn't just playing the game, she was rewriting it. But in the wake of the journal scandal, that game flipped on her. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't the one pulling the strings. She was the puppet, dangling under the weight of her own words. The press is the enemy, she had often said publicly. Yet, ironically, the press became her only possible ally once her private entries surfaced. Think about the contradiction. The woman who sued tabloids, who railed against leaks, now needed those same outlets to believe her side of the story. But here's the catch. The press wasn't interested in saving her. They smelled blood, and Meghan had given them the knife. Leaks began strategically, not dumped all at once. It was no accident. A paragraph about Harry on Monday. A bitter jab at Kate on Thursday. A critique of Charles on Sunday.